Welcome to West Country Wanderings and welcome back to the fabulous county of Cornwall. Yes, I'm back in Cornwall. In actual fact, I'm back on the Lizard. I was back here between Christmas and New Year time. In fact, it might have been a little bit just before Christmas, probably a week or two before Christmas. Been so busy on the channel lately, as you know, if you've probably seen my vlog. It may have been 3 or 4 weeks ago now. I was at a place called Church Cove at Gunwallow, which is just a mile over this headland here, which is just in front of me. So I've just come around the corner to a place called Poldhu Cove. Now, Poldhu Cove is a National Trust owned beach. There is a council car park, not a National Trust car park, but there's a council car park just the other side of the road, which takes you into the village of Mullion. There's also a lovely cafe cum kiosk here right on the beach, and we're here towards the end of January. It's the 23rd, I think, something like that today. We're coming up towards the end of January and the cafe is open, which is absolutely fabulous. So no matter if you want to come here for a lovely winter walk, welcome to do that. The reason I've decided to come to this particular location today, apart from a lovely golden sand beach with interesting geology, is to show you not so much that, but what's on the headland just behind me, which has historical connections to the world of technology, and we'll talk more about that when we're going to walk up the coast path which takes you up to the top at Poldhu Point. We're going to continue our walk then into the village of Mullion, which has a harbour and its own island. I'm going to tell you more about that, including some of the famous residents that came from the village of Mullion. So why not join me here on West Country Wanderings on the Lizard in Cornwall. Now, the large building that you can see on the headland just behind me, just there, I think that's where it is, it used to be a hotel, the Poldhu Hotel. It's now in fact a care home, but in 1901 a very famous resident stayed there. So if you follow me, I'll tell you more of the whole story. Now, the Lizard in Cornwall has a very complex geology. I'm not going to go into the great deal of detail about what makes it up. Just worth pointing out that the Lizard is famous for a particular rock called serpentine. It's coloured green. In fact, there is a shop in Lizard Town just a few miles to the south of me where you can purchase carved stone where it's been polished. Beautiful, which makes beautiful ornaments, fantastic arrangements. But yeah, serpentine. I will drop in the links of what the local rocks are here just in as a subtitle. What we're going to do now is we're going to make our way to the top up by that large building on there and tell you some more about that. So why not join me here on West Country Wanderings. Now, I'm standing on a very important spot in terms of the world of telecommunications. In fact, we live in a very connected world these days. We use radio, television, satellite communications and of course mobile phones. But without what happened here 1901, some 121 years ago, none of it may have happened. A really important event happened. What happened here? I'll tell you some more. On the 12th of December 1901, Guglielmo Marconi set up his radio transmitter here, and there are still some aerial arrays here which represent what was here originally during that period of time. And what his experiment was to transmit Morse code from this location in West Cornwall across the Atlantic Ocean, which is in front of me, to Newfoundland. And which was an incredible thing in those days. Radio had hardly been invented. We'd had telegraphy and we were able to transmit Morse code using wires through the Atlantic. That had been happening for some 40 odd years prior to his experiments, but to use it on such a huge distance across the Atlantic Ocean using just purely radio waves was an unheard of concept, but he wanted to try and see if it worked. So on the 12th of December, Marconi sent out 3 Morse code dots from this particular site here, and it went to Signal Hill, St John's in Newfoundland. The station was built partly on clifftop pastures had been enclosed in 1871. In actual fact, when they developed this site ready for the radio broadcast, they uncovered a long barrow. In fact, a couple of enclosures were uncovered, and I think some pottery pieces were uncovered as well. But of course, it wasn't about the people, the ancient Britons that lived here, and the Celts. It was to do with the telecommunications that, of course, this place is now famous. To design the spark transmitter, the first high-powered radio transmitter in the world, Marconi hired Professor John Ambrose Fleming from the University College in London, and he then built a 20-mast circular aerial. And unfortunately, that original mast was destroyed in a storm in September of 1901, just a few months before the experiment was due to take place. Marconi hastily built a temporary array of 50 wires at this exact spot, suspended in a fan shape, and I'll see if I can get a photograph, insert that now, from a cable between two 200-foot masts, 61-metre masts. And you can see one of them, not the original one, masts actually behind me at the moment. Fleming estimated the transmitter's radiated power was between 10 and 12 kilowatts. The frequency used is not known precisely, as Marconi did not measure the wavelength or frequency, which seems a strange thing that he didn't, because obviously radio is all about around what frequency it is, as in tuning in the dial to listen to your favourite radio station, of course. But it was between 166 and 98.4 kilohertz, probably around 500 kilohertz. And after the experiment, the original mast layout was not rebuilt. It was replaced with 4-mast design, 215 feet high, and forming a 200-foot square. Now, Marconi used this very same spot later on in 1923 to carry out shortwave radio experiments, long-distance experiments. So it wasn't just Morse code being transmitted, just the dots. It was actually sound, people's voices. And what he did was he demolished the original site and worked with Charles Samuel Franklin, and he bounced it off a yacht called the Electra to the Cape Verde Islands in 1923, and also to Beirut in 1924. The groundbreaking results of these experiments took the world by surprise and quickly resulted in his development of the beam wireless service for the British General Post Office, the GPO, which obviously then became the Royal Mail, BT, etc., etc. The service opened from the Bodmin Beam Station. In fact, if you drive across the A30 heading into Cornwall, you can see some remains of that transmitter site there, just off to the left of the A30 as you're heading towards Penzance direction. And it went from there to Canada, transmitting into Canada on the 25th of October 1926 from the Tetney Beam Station to Australia on 8th of April 1927, and from the Bodmin Beam Station to South Africa from the 5th of July 1927, and then it expanded to India, Argentina and Brazil, so then across the globe. So you can see from 1901 we have 3 dots. Then we're using Morse code transmissions. Early part of the 1920s, we have going out to yachts out in the Atlantic, and then we're spreading across the continents further and further away into the southern hemisphere. Amazing. It was an incredible concept at the time. Of course, today we don't think about it. You know, we just pick up our mobile phones. We can speak to somebody in Australia using Skype or WhatsApp. We don't think, and of course we can see their image, video as live feed, and it just happens in a split second. We don't think about it these days. But at that time, some 100 years ago, it was a groundbreaking concept. Now, I mentioned at the start was that the building behind you, as I say, which is now the Poldhu care home, was the Poldhu Hotel. And in actual fact, there is a visitor's book which is still in the care home, which showed that Guglielmo Marconi stayed here at this hotel in 1901 when he was carrying out his famous transatlantic radio broadcasts. Now, this block here, you might see these if you go up to, say, a television transmitter site, and these would have been used to support the aerial. There would have been cable ties, and this would have supported the actual array to make sure it was steady during the storms. And of course, as we know, the first construction in September of that year collapsed in that storm and they had to be hastily rebuilt. But of course, when the experiments advanced into shortwave telecommunications, they needed a more robust system, and this is evidence of that. Now what we have here, the remains of one of the transmitter buildings which was used during the shortwave experiments in the early 1920s. So obviously it's just the foundations that remain here. In fact, if you search through this whole field that I'm currently standing in, as well as the aerial array in front of me, which is obviously a replica of the original experiments, you have all these sites. You have the blocks which I just showed you of the cable stays, and you have remains of other buildings that were used for these radio experiments. I have a personal connection which gives me an affinity to this site. No, I didn't know Guglielmo Marconi. I'm not related to him or anything at all, but I've mentioned before that I was in the Royal Air Force for 10 years. In fact, I was a radar technician, so I worked on similar type equipment as radio and what they use in television transmitters, all that type of thing. But after I left the Royal Air Force, for some time I worked for Marconi radar systems in Chelmsford in Essex, and that though Guglielmo Marconi wasn't directly responsible for a lot of the work that happened with Marconi radar research, he did actually set up the company, and of course it was named up in his honour, although other people were affiliated to it later on. So I do feel like a deep sense of connection to what Marconi did all those years ago on this site here on the Lizard in Cornwall. Now the lovely monument behind me with the globe erected on top of it, I believe was put up in place in 1960. Before that though, in 1937, the Marconi company, I've said, which I worked for, donated some 6 acres of the land here that Guglielmo Marconi used in 1901 and again in the 1920s, and then donated that land to the National Trust so it could be preserved for future generations to commemorate the sterling work that Marconi did to establish telecommunications right across the globe. So what we're going to do now, we're going to leave the Marconi site here at the top of Poldhu Cliff, and we're going to make our way down to the village of Mullion, have a look at Mullion Island. You're not allowed on the island, it is actually owned by the National Trust as well, and it's a great spot for seabirds. One final thing to mention here is Housel Bay. Now I'll put in some subtitles beneath here because Marconi used another site on the Lizard called Housel Bay. We won't have time to visit it as well, and I'll put the date that I used that site. If I can get a stock photograph of it, I'll include that now as well. So we've now come from Poldhu Cove round a headland. We were on the top of Poldhu when we were talking about the Marconi transmissions, and we now, before we arrive at Mullion Cove and Mullion Harbour, we've arrived at yet another cove. This one's called Poldhu. I'll put it at the spelling in. I always find it difficult to say this one, Poldhu Cove. And yeah, so this one's absolutely delightful. It's got different coloured sands. There's a mixture of coloured sands here, and there's only a couple of people here at the moment, and it's place himself. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of erosion here, so getting onto the beach at the moment is quite tricksy because the steps have eroded away at the base. There's a couple of the lower steps missing if you are coming here over the next few weeks. then please be very, very careful as you make your descent from the cliff top path onto the beach. So that island there is Mullion Island. As I say, it's owned by the National Trust. You can't actually get access onto it, but it is a haven for seabirds. Just to tell you about a few fascinating people that were either born or lived and spent some of or all of their life here in Mullion. I think the first interesting one you're going to find, I'm going to really find this one difficult to pronounce, Svetlana Aliyevna. Now I'll put the spelling of that down the bottom. Now she was born in 1926 and lived until 2011, and she was later known as Lana Peters, and she was the daughter of one Joseph Stalin, no less, and spent part of her life here in Mullion. Also, Stephen Holden Beatty, now Captain Beatty, was awarded his VC, being the captain of the HMS Campbelltown, which was used to ram and destroy the dock gates in the Saint-Nazaire to prevent it being used by the German battle of its Tirpitz. James Ersey was born at Ersey House near Mullion in 1560, and he sailed as a privateer with Sir Francis Drake. Now, two more people that came from Mullion. One was Sheila Tracy. Now, she presented many programmes on BBC Radio 2 for probably 30 or 40 years. She was born here in Mullion in 1934. Now, what's interesting about her life is before she became a broadcaster with the BBC, she played trombone in many all-female jazz bands. The final person was Squadron Leader Geoffrey Mellom, who was a British Battle of Britain fighter pilot. He later became a successful author and retired to Mullion in the 1980s. Well, that's all from West Country Wanderings for today. Hope you enjoyed this little trip here in Cornwall, finding out about Marconi's experiments here on the top of Poldhu Point, and also looking at that wonderful island at Mullion Cove and the harbour here. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider a like, a subscribe, a share or a comment. Until next time, take care of yourselves. All the best. I hope to see you on here again very, very soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.